Good morning.
Good morning. All right, looking forward to another conversation. We've got a couple things lined up. We want to talk about botany. We want to talk about the importance of Latin. So for those of you that are aspiring herbalists, you're on your journey learning about herbs, we're going to talk about the importance of Latin. And we also had a viewer question we're going to talk about too.
Well, the Latin thing, firstly, this word taxonomy. Taxis is an old Greek word that's spelled exactly like taxis.
Right.
Just taxis means to arrange.
Okay.
So taxonomy is the science of arranging things.
Right.
And when you take, there's a few 100,000 species of plants in the world, and you want to arrange them in some way, that's taxonomy. And a Swiss man named Carl Linnaeus, about 300 years ago, came up with this system. It's called the binomial naming system.
Right.
So you have two words usually, and if it needs to, you can go to three.
Right.
But usually it's just two. And it starts a little backwards to how our names work, where the second name of a plant, or it would be like our last name, comes first.
Yeah.
So I would be Andrusekius Blaineus.
Right.
So you could have, like yarrow, for example, it's called Achillea millefolium.
Mm-hmm.
So Achilles, there's legends that go back to the time of Achilles when they started using it, and millefolium is in reference to all of the little finely, it looks like somebody on Lord knows what sort of drug, like a really, really bored botanist took an X-Acto knife to hack up the leaves. They're cut so fine.
Yeah.
So millefolium means 1,000 leaflets.
Right.
So you got all, if there's another yarrow, and we do have one that grows in the south of our province that lives out in the deserty areas, so it's very fuzzy and it has yellow flowers, and the fuzzy coating on it is to protect it from the intense heat.
Right.
Like a lot of things like mullein, for example, that grow in deserty areas, they use it. I used to wonder why you'd see Arabians in all these clothings, and you'd think, well, don't they get real hot?
Yeah,
but all those layers of cotton was actually keeping them cool, right?
Right.
So the plants do the same thing. Anyway, so the one thing up, anyway, so taxonomy is to arrange, and we go through different. It's like that old game, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, that we used to play on rainy days at the lake, where as children we do this I spy with my little eye.
Right.
And it's something, is it bigger than a toaster? And you ask questions like that. So
Yeah.
I said, I have a plant. And you might say, is it tall? Is it a tall plant with a main stem that's woody? Yes. And you say, and it has branches? We'll call it a tree.
Right.
Okay. So like bamboo isn't a tree because it doesn't branch. Like it grows tall and straight, right?
Right.
So so now we've got trees, and anything it dies off for the winter in our climate, but the woody stems stay. So we're going to call that a shrub. Where if something dies back completely in the fall, we call it a herb.
Right.
Right. So those are three divisions,
Yeah.
and then we go from there until you finally get to things that look quite alike, and so that's called a genus.
Right.
And then so we have the generic name, like it could be Rosacea, and there's a lot of people don't realize you say Rosacea, you think about the flowers, but like a lot of our fruits,
Right.
like peaches and apples and things are in the rose family, and nuts too, almonds and things are in the rose family. So so that's a family, and then you cut it into genus and then to species. So with our wild roses in Alberta, we have 2 or 3 species. So it would be Rosacea, and then the second word is a descriptive adjective.
Right.
And so as you get into it a bit, you start to learn that second word is just a descriptive adjective. It could be the shape of the leaf. Like if you had a family, or a genus, with 7 members, and all the rest of them had long, skinny leaves, but one had triangular-shaped leaves. You would call it, well, again, Rosacea triangularis, because it's the only rose that has triangular leaves.
Right.
Right. So sometimes it's that, or it could be where they like to live. Like if they like living out in a pasture or meadow somewhere, then the Latin name for of the field is arvensis.
Right.
So it would be Rosacea arvensis.
Yeah.
Or there might be a rose that actually likes wet feet, so it likes to be in or near water. So we call it Rosa aquaticus.
Right.
So some of that you catch on after a while when you're using the words. But it's quite important to know the Latin names, because common names are like slang.
Right.
And like there's one called scurvy grass, for example.
Yeah.
There's 3 species in Canada, and I'm not sure that any of them are actually grasses.
Right.
But they're called scurvy grass because all of the plants must have been high in vitamin C.
Right.
So somebody used this plant to prevent scurvy, so it got the name scurvy grass.
Right.
So sometimes we'll end up with plants they could be quite dangerous lookalikes. Like there's a plant called water hemlock, and the roots are deadly, right? But it looks a lot like another plant that the roots are yummy. So you have to have the differentiation of knowing what the leaves look like. Or if I have somebody new helping me pick arnica, for example, we have 11 species in Alberta, and part of the difference is you have to look at the leaves, the way they attach to the main stem, because on one of them, the leaves are going like this, alternating up the stem, so that's what they're called.
Right.
And on the other one, they're called opposite attachment, because they're going like this. So the arnica we want has opposite attachment and a particular type of branching. And the flowers all look the same. So you have to look at those leaves before you pick the flowers, right? So it helps us a lot with proper identification. We don't want to miss something up that's poisonous instead of a nice salad.
Yeah.
Right? And I got into all of that not as a herbalist initially, although I was becoming a herbalist at the time, but I was already a photographer and was photographing a lot of wild plants and mushrooms.
Yeah.
So I had to make darn sure if I got a shot requirement list from a book coming up, it was a bit like bounty hunting. And I'm going to a place like Waterton Park. There's a lot of plants there.
Yeah.
In fact, Waterton Park is a place to go if you really wanted to look at plants. I forget the exact numbers here, but something like 15% of all of the plants that grow in Alberta only grow in that park.
Really? Wow.
And yet 90% of all of the plants in Alberta do grow in that park. Right. So if you want to study plants or photograph them, it's a great place to go, right? There's a lot of different plants there. And some of them you have to be there at the right time of season, of course. There's some that bloom in the spring, some of them in the fall. There's some in deserty areas. And that's why Waterton has so many species, there's so many habitats. Like it's kind of where the prairies meet the mountains with no foothills.
Right.
But over there's some foothills, and so that's why it's the complexity of environments that allows for it. But mostly it's to make sure we have the right one. Like eucalyptus, for example, there's nearly 700 species.
Holy.
A lot of which are just used for lumber.
Right.
They use it to build decks or whatever, like we use cedar, because the oils in the wood repel insects.
Right.
So the termites aren't going to eat your deck in 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? So the ones that we more commonly use medicinally have nothing to do with the ones that you see in dried flower arrangements.
Right.
It's called silver dollar eucalyptus, I think, and it's the only one that has round leaves.
Right.
And yet so many people hear eucalyptus and they think, oh, that's eucalyptus.
Yeah.
But it's not the ones we use medicinally.
No.
So most of the medicinal eucalyptus has long, narrow leaves called lanceolate. That's because the leaves look kind of like the spearhead, the lance head of a spear. So it could be relative to the flower, or like the 2 species that I mostly use are radiata and globulus, and their chemistry is quite different.
Yeah.
So in is how I brought them up. Eucalyptus radiata is much lighter in smell, far safer for women and children, and one of the better ones that's actually antiviral.
Right.
Right? But another one we use a lot, and you might prefer it in your steam room, is called Globulus, and it has, because of the difference in chemistry, it's a stronger smell, and when you smell it, it's going to make you cough immediately.
Right.
So if you're all stuffed up and you need to get that crap out of your lungs, you want Globulus.
Right.
But if day to day you just want protection, so if you hear there's a flu or a cold coming around and all you've got to work with is eucalyptus, I would choose radiata.
Right.
Right. So it helps a lot to know which species does what better. And some of those families, like the rose family, is huge. Like I mentioned, a lot of our fruit trees are actually roses.
Right.
But you wouldn't look at it and think it's a rose, but it has something in common with a rose.
Yeah.
So
Pine is another huge family as well. Like all the conifers that we know of, most of them are in the pine family. I think I've got that right, versus genus. Because then, like spruce, cedar,
yeah.
hemlock, those kinds of things.
Well, and you can have, in some cases, as we go through those designations between class and order and family and then genus, so you can have a plant, I'm trying to think of one, like some of the asters that grow wild in Alberta.
Right.
You can actually have an aster that's an aster.
Right.
Right? And so it fits all the categories.
Right.
So back to...
But is it really what's your aster, though?
In some cases, it doesn't matter. Maybe you're just picking flowers to put in a vase for your kitchen table, right?
Yeah.
So it's a way of getting things right and making sure that, in some cases, wildcrafters spend all day picking the wrong species, and then they expect to get paid at the end of the day. And
Right.
sorry, but your sack full of roots or flowers or whatever isn't worth anything to me because it's the wrong plant.
Yeah.
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 So
I like to use the example of, for a common name, go pick me some buffalo berry. Right? Well, are you talking about Shepherdea canadensis? Or are we talking about Shepherdea argentea? Yeah, you get specific with the Latin name.
Yeah, and in both of those plants, you can work with the berries.
Yeah.
But only after a frost.
Right.
And I've always wondered, I've never tried, to simulate that. Like if you picked a bunch, it's late summer and the berries are all there.
Yeah.
Would it actually work if you put them in the freezer?
Right, pick them, yeah.
I don't know.
Them. I would imagine maybe there's something to that window of time. They just get to ripen just slightly more, before the frost. But I think for all intents and purposes, if it's just about there and hasn't frosted and you pick them and throw in the freezer, I think it's better to leave them on as you can, but sometimes you don't have the choice.
Or you might know they're going to be around because nobody else, unless you're in country where a bear might beat you to them.
Yeah.
That you'll come back next week because you looked at the weather forecast and we're going to get a -5 on Tuesday.
Right.
Then it's sunny again on Saturday, back up to +8 or something. That's the day you pick them.
Right. Yeah. So definitely recommend for those of you on your herbal journey, you don't have to memorize it all, but begin to, I treat it like a game, like Denis and I will always be kind of like, trying to like Latin name back and forth kind of thing. Yeah, it's very, very helpful.
It's fun.
Yeah.
I got into almost an argument with another dog owner one day early in the morning and mentioned the pine tree that's over there by the mailbox. And he said, oh yeah, that's lodgepole, or sorry, that's, I'm trying to think now of another one. It's not lodgepole. It's one of the ones with really long needles. Anyway, he said, that's a blah, blah, blah.
The Ponderosa?
And I said, maybe at Ponderosa, yeah. And thank you. And I said, no, that's actually blah, blah, blah. And it isn't native here,
right.
But it was brought in for the park. And he said, no, that's definitely a blah, blah, blah. And he said, I've taken a botany class at Olds College and blah, blah, blah. And he was all a little haughty about it. And
Did he know who he was talking to?
He said, well, yeah. And so he said, I have a book. I can bring you and show you the book. It's called Wild Herbs and Shrubs of Alberta.
Right.
And I said, well, okay, bring it tomorrow morning. And he brought his book. And I said, yeah, great. That's the same one. Yeah. And on the cover, see, that's me. I'm Blaine Andrusek. And he went, oh. gosh, and he shook my hand and was embarrassed.
Right.
You know, that he realized he was actually talking to somebody who might know what they're talking about.
Right. Funny.
So
Yeah, because you did all the photography for Terry's book as well, right?
most of it.
Most of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Terry did some of it himself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I don't
out of
think
print now, I believe.
between the two of us, I don't think we needed to go to a stock house for anything.
No, I doubt it.
Because again, he had a list, and I did my best to fulfill it.
Right.
So I could go. That was a nice era in my life because I could legitimately, I could write off camping trips.
Yeah.
So I could go down to Waterton, for example, and camp and pay my camping fees and everything, and write off my gas and my everything, you know, for the trip.
Totally.
Because I made a few $100s on it. That's when I felt like a bounty hunter.
Right.
Because I'd be looking for plants with a list, and I would immediately, if I found out, Writing on Stone was an example where they had a botanist on staff that would be there to do guided
really?
walks and things.
Yeah.
So I would phone and find out when I could say, well, what about these 2 cactus? Do you have any cactus? Oh, the cactus is everywhere. So what about them? And they say, well, that species, you want to come in that month, but the other one's several weeks behind.
Right.
So,
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? Hey?
and it was fun that somebody at that level, ahead of me, I said, well, what about these little yellow ones over here? And they'd kind of shrug and groan and say, oh, those are LYMs. I said, oh, what are LYMs? What was that? And little yellow mothers.
Yeah.
That we have no idea what they are. So they had their slang just out of their own frustration, right?
It's like the LBMs, you know, of the mushroom world, the little brown mushrooms. Oh yeah, it's another LBM.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing it too.
Yeah. Yeah, wouldn't that be great? Because recently, you know, following the pine pollen season, I wanted to go to BC. I was like, man, I should just do a camping trip, like go drive myself to some ponderosas and just go picking. But I had no idea, right? I mean, it takes that drive to go out there, or knowing somebody in the area that can say, yep, all right, the time is now, come on out. But being a few hours away and family man, businessman, it just wasn't going to happen. So we had to organize around here, and it turned out well. So definitely got a good harvest. But
well, when we look at things like lodgepole, for example, where'd that name come from? Well, because they were the absolute best tree to use for your teepee poles.
Right.
And as soon as you're as far east of the foothills as we are right now, there's no more lodgepole pine.
Right.
So First Nation people would come from the other side of Winnipeg all this way, maybe having to trade and barter to get this far without having a fight with somebody.
Yeah.
Because they're going through other tribes' turf.
Yeah.
And just to get their lodgepoles, and then drag them all the way home. So the lodgepoles, I always laugh in movies where we have these scenes where there's a group of, they headed west in 1849, settlers coming.
Yeah.
And they've got wagons with canvas covers on them.
Right.
And all of a sudden, they're attacked by a group of First Nation people with flaming arrows.
Right.
And no, that never happened. They didn't have flaming arrows. And the last thing they would do is burn the canvas.
Right.
They didn't want to bother. They just wanted to steal the canvas.
Right.
Because traditionally, the teepee covers were made out of buffalo hides, which when it rains for 3 days are really heavy and stinky.
Yeah.
And if you had to move camp, that was a lot of work. But canvas dries in a couple of hours, and it's light and bright inside instead of dark and stinky.
Right.
So all they wanted was the canvas.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They might have even given those people some furs or something in trade, but we have all of those silly scenes, right? Never happened. So, sorry.
Lodgepole is a funny one because at least in the Latin name, because you've just mentioned it's just very kind of like tall, straight.
Yeah, and
tree.
only this big at the bottom.
Yeah.
So they're light.
Amazing. And yet the Latin name is Pinus contorta.
Right.
Right? Like, which I am imagining, contorted kind of a thing. But I think that more relates to the cone than it does the tree. I'm not sure where that name comes from, the contorta.
And if you're confused between jack pine and lodgepole ever, Like jack pine tends to branch out a little bit more, but the cones on a jack pine face out towards the tip of the branches, and on lodgepole they point in towards the tree. So it's kind of saying, "Come on in." Right. And so
Yeah.
So the cones will tell you which species you have.
Right. Yeah.
If you're ever in doubt.
It's true. Sometimes you got to look at the bark, the needles, the cones, all these kind of clues. Yeah, and I'm not sure which jack pine is, but I know lodgepole is a two-needle pine, whereas you have a white pine or a ponderosa.
They almost look like tweezers.
Yeah, the white and the ponderosa are a 5-needle pine.
Right.
Or no, wait, maybe ponderosa isn't. I know for sure the white is a 5-needle pine.
Well, I think that was the discussion I had with that guy in the park.
Right. Okay.
It was over the needles. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. But we have 2 pines that are mostly only in the southern part of the province. If you want them, you have to go to like Crow's Nest Pass area or whatever.
Right.
And there's limber pine and white bark pine.
Right.
And they're the ones that grow there. That the trees don't necessarily get very big at all, but they have cones about this big.
Wow.
And stealing the nuts is very worth doing.
Yeah.
Because the nuts of those 2 from those big cones are quite large, like the pine nuts you would buy in the store.
Yeah.
So I always tell people if they're going to go collect those, you want to go down, take a blanket, and depending on what you're intending, you might even take a ladder with you or some ropes if you're a climber, and just sit somewhere comfortably. If you're so inclined, bring some margaritas with you or whatever, some green tea, and sit there and watch what the squirrels are doing
Right.
all morning and most of the afternoon, because they keep going all over the place, getting nuts, and they fill their cheeks up with the nuts, and then bring them down. There's a hollow tree over there,
Right.
and they're putting them all. That's their cache.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you just go steal all their cache, right?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
you don't have to be too guilty about that, because that's why squirrels are so squirrely.
Right.
And I've quite often found big caches in hollow trunks that were rotting because the squirrels forgot they put them there.
No, exactly.
I don't think they're that bright in that area. They just know they have to keep it. But get more nuts. Winter's coming. Get more nuts. Get more nuts. Get more nuts. Where did you put yesterday's yesterday deer? I don't know. There's some more. We'll go get some more.
Yeah.
And they just keep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're going to roast them anyway, so that they were in squirrels' cheeks for 5 minutes doesn't bother me at all.
No, for sure. Yeah. And they have a bit of a shell on them too, right? I've never harvested wild pine nuts.
Well, no, there's no shell. The ones I've picked or gathered are
just like papery thin at all.
Like each scale, it's called on the
Right.
cone. So if the cone was this or the scale was this big, there's the nuts just there,
right?
And you can shake them out, as from my memory.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I'd love to do that. I know that commercially it's often like a Korean pine that has like huge cones and substantial size nuts.
Yeah, and they must grow or maybe they buy them, but I think I learned to eat pine nuts from Greek food.
Right, yeah.
So they must have that. Like when I was in France, there was a lot of conifers, which are our so-called softwoods. There's a lot of conifers in Europe that we don't have here.
Right.
Some of them were common with ours, but lots of different conifers there.
Yeah.
So some of the ones we get as essential oils, for example, don't grow here.
Right.
That's why they're coming from other countries in Europe.
Yeah, like just pine alone, I think there's like 115 different species of true pine. And then again, within that family, then you've got all the other conifers as well.
Picea is spruce.
Right.
And the true pines that we have here are Pinus. Some people want to say penis, but it's Pinus.
Yeah, Pinus, yeah.
Pinus.
Yeah, although it's interesting, there's that connection, Denny always likes to say, pine will help you make you grow woody. It's kind of an aphrodisiac.
That sounds like something he'd come up with, yes.
Yeah.
So Yeah, it
Yeah.
was all about the teepee poles.
Right.
And
Yeah, interesting. I came across in Beverly Gray's book, The Boreal Herbal.
Yep.
She's talking about, she does, in kind of each of the sections, plants, she talks about, kind of the chemical constituents, its benefits, its uses, and then she usually puts in something more about kind of the spiritual or the energetic properties. And very interesting, because over the last few years, I think pine has been a real beacon for a lot of people. There was a lot of conversation around it being very antiviral, helping with, through the pandemic, inhibit respiratory viruses, but also there was a lot of conversation around it, helping with the vaccine or shedding or, whatever different ideas that people had.
Right.
And so, yeah, a lot of people who were seeking a different way, not choosing to kind of go the mainstream way, we're out looking for pine. And so in that book, actually, which she wrote many years ago, said one of the kind of more energetic properties of pine was about people standing in their upright in their own power and being strong in their voice.
Well,
yeah. So,
yeah, I haven't seen her for quite a few years.
yeah, she's actually in Ireland right now. She's, obviously, if anybody does not know Beverly Gray, amazing woman, fantastic herbalist that's been based out of Whitehorse, Yukon for a long time. Aroma Borealis is the name of her little shop up there. But
Right.
In the last few years, she's actually she had moved to Ireland. And she since seems to be kind of doing a bit of both. Time in the Yukon, time in Ireland, and just loving the land of the fairies and yeah.
Well, something that I'm going to bring up in this talk on the weekend.
Yeah,
and
which
I'm literally calling it aroma what?
aroma what?
Because there's been so much confusion in recent years with more and more people working with essential oils and a lot of assumptions. And there's a lot of bad information in aromatherapy books because in some cases, Bill just quoted Nancy, quoted Ted,
Yeah.
and Ted didn't know what he was talking about in the first place. So if you have 3 books that all say the same thing,
Right.
and one book that says something totally different, most people are going to run with the pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you check the citations, you might discover what I just said was that
Right.
a mistake happened and it's like a joke being retold.
Yeah, the telephone game.
So, not that I'd be rushing to Home Depot for pine for somebody with a bad bronchial infection, but it would work perfectly well.
Yeah.
So, what happened there? Well, terpenes are plants, well, all essential oils have at least some terpenes in them. And these plants make these little, carbon likes to hang out with carbon, just like we're together because we met about plants and we have a common interest, and here we are today. So carbon hangs out in a number of different ways with other carbons. Mm-hmm. And in plants, a very common one is a little 5-pack of carbons called an isoprene unit. 5 carbons, and in organic chemistry, the first orbital in a molecule has room for 10 ions or atoms, sorry. And so if you've got a 5-pack and you're around some hydrogens, which is everywhere, if you're an 8, you'd rather be a 10.
Right.
It's kind of like a 6 dressed up as a 9 in cosmetic circles.
Right.
So each carbon can hold hands with a couple of hydrogens. So we get C5H2. And we live in a hydrocarbon environment in Alberta because so much of our economy is based on fuels. So like propane, for example, is 3 carbons holding hands.
Right.
And methane, which is cow farts, is 4. So 4 carbons hold hands, so CH4 is methane. So you get these little, they're called isoprene units, and if 2 of them hold hands, that's called a monoterpene. And it's got some uses, like turpentine. And then I always say it's a little bit like buying one of those screwdriver kits where you have a handle, which isn't good for too much by itself. Get the cat off the couch, when you throw it at the cat. But it can be accessorized like crazy.
Right.
So if you take a monoterpene, you can add another isoprene unit, and then it's called a sesquiterpene. And a lot of people hear that thing now because of CBD oils.
Right.
And people think sesquiterpene, what's a sesquiterpene? Well, that's what it is. It's a 15 carbon, and they can come either as a chain, which is called aliphatic, or they can make cyclic arrangements in their molecular structure, so then it's called cyclic. There's another thing that carbons will do with 6 carbons will hold hands with an appropriate number of hydrogens, and that's called an aromatic ring, even though by itself it has no aroma whatsoever. Right. It's also called a benzene ring. But if you add 1 oxygen to it, then it calls a phenol. And if you add 1 oxygen to any mono or sesquiterpene, then it's called alcohol.
Great.
So all you have to do is take a monoterpene and add 1 oxygen molecule, and you've got something like linalool, which is an important, one of the main chemicals in lavender, for example. Where did I go with all that? So if we take pine boughs, which in the wood industry are all just cut off and wasted because we want to get the lumber, right? That all gets shaved off, and then everything gets cut into 2x8s or whatever. So we're making it from, let's call it a byproduct industry, where rather than those branches just being composted, we can take them all and distill them. So we got a really cheap source, and the branches are full of, as you mentioned the other day, needles or leaves that have a high component. You just walk in the forest, you can smell them. A high component of monoterpenes. So if you distill them, you get something that's a terpene from a pine tree. So we could call it terpene pine. That's a little hard to say. So what's easier to say? How about turpentine?
Right.
Okay. So if you're out in the country somewhere and somebody's really sick, I've done this even with a pneumonia at one point when a little girl had a really bad pneumonia, and there was a blizzard on, and a few friends, it was probably Christmas season, and they didn't have any essential oils. I didn't have anything with me. And I went up to the barn where a bunch of paints and things were stored, and sure enough found a bottle of turpentine, and get out a pot or whatever, fill it with a wood stove, some boiling water into a pot. Pot's better than a bowl because they got a flat bottom. It's not going to spill and scalder. And put just, not too much, just a little shot of turpentine in the bowl, and throw a towel over her head and have her just sit there and breathe the fumes.
Right.
So I always feel a little irritated when I see somebody advertising that they only have medicinal grade essential oils,
Right.
when things like turpentine are still usable, mostly for cleaning paintbrushes. But they still have medicinal value.
Right, totally.
So that's just going to be stuff I'm going to talk about on Sunday. Was it Sunday or Saturday?
Oh,
Just a couple of weeks away.
Sunday, June 25th. If you haven't heard,
There's an open house at the Light Cellar.
Yeah, totally.
And there'll be a few of us doing short talks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I'll be there hanging out from the middle of the day. I'll be there for the rest of the day on Sunday.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So we're going to start at 12.
Old friends, come and give me a hug.
For sure.
Yeah,
it'll be awesome to have you live in person.
And it's going to be the first time I've done anything public live in almost 3 years.
Yeah, it's amazing.
From a guy who used to see 8 to 10 audiences a week.
Yeah.
I've been sitting in rooms, I was in a hospital for quite a while, and then in a care home now. And I've got a lovely room. It faces south. It's bright during the day, and
get some plants in
get
there.
some plants going. And one day, a couple of weeks ago, I was just rubbing some cream on my legs, and I sensed some movement and turned my head without even sitting up. And there was a deer right in front of my window grazing on some shrubs there. And I said, okay, I'd love to go tell the guy next door. There's a gentleman about 10 years older than me that I eat beside quite often. I'd like to go tell him that it's there to watch him. But I think even if I sit up, I'm going to scare it away. And after a few minutes more, I did, even just sitting up, it sensed the movement.
Right.
It didn't run. It just kind of perked up. And deer have really bad vision,
Right.
but they have really good hearing.
Yeah.
So at times, if you see a herd of deer in a field, if you try and approach them, some of them might sort of go alert, and they can't, if you just freeze, they just think you're a stump.
Right.
But their ears are going like this, like they're scanning for signals, right?
Yeah.
And you can just freeze, and they go back to grazing. Mm-hmm. So you move another few feet, and if they lift their heads, you just stop. Okay. And I've several times been able to just stalk right into a herd of deer,
Yeah.
like really close, and give them a carrot or something, you know? And so, so they have lousy sight, really good hearing. Anyway, I didn't go let, his name's Gordon, know, because I thought if I actually stood up, this thing's going to run away. And they're just, usually, what do? We see deer crossing the highway, or we're out hunting deer, or we're doing whatever. And it was just so nice to watch such a gentle animal grazing right in front of my window. So for a guy like me that's usually in the wilderness a lot, that was very meaningful and meditative for me.
Yeah, nice.
And it turned out when it finally gave up, it was standing, there was a mountain ash just a little further away, and it was standing right up on its back heels
Right.
to pick the berries in higher branches. And it finally gave up on the shrubs I had and was moving away. And then only then that I realized there was another one right in front of the next door neighbor's window, because it came up to join the other. There was two of them together,
no way.
And in a neighborhood like Brentwood, I wasn't expecting to see deer.
Yeah.
A bunny maybe, like you've got bunnies here, but it would rather surprise me if a deer walked up the street here.
Yeah.
Things happen like that, like
Yeah.
Fish Creek Park. They've had moose in somebody's
totally.
backyard, and
Yeah.
occasionally a bear, kind of thing. They follow the river up, and
Yeah. Yeah, Calgary's amazing for that. Like we're really lucky. I've seen porcupine, deer.
Yeah, the riverbeds.
Yeah.
They follow the river up. But not like, even though we've got lots in the close foothills, I've never heard of a cougar being in the city.
No, I haven't heard or seen one
Where
of
in like
those.
Victoria, you get them quite an issue at times. Like, I remember one when I was there visiting, where a girl renting a basement suite came home from work one day, and there was one in her bedroom.
No way.
That freaked out when she got in.
Wow.
Because there was a basement window with no screen or anything, and this thing literally just jumped in the window.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so they get a few.
We've got bobcat around here. I've watched them.
Yeah, bobcat have come in a lot, I
Yeah.
guess, in the inner city. They're in Rotary Park, right by the Center Street Bridge.
Oh, no way.
Which is where I've been living for 35 years.
Yeah.
And lots of coyotes.
Yeah.
Which I never minded.
No.
I might be going out for a dog walk early in the morning, and a young coyote would just be trotting up the sidewalk, and it might even lay down on the neighbor's grass and kind of do a little Scooby-Doo on its back to scrub. I don't know if it was itchy or had bugs in its hair or whatever. But it was always interesting that when they would never look directly at you. They looked like they were insane, because like I'd be talking at you, but I'm actually looking at the spruce tree in the front yard. Or you get some people where I'm going to talk to your ears,
Right.
but there's never eye contact. I'm just going to talk to your ears. Don't I look a little insane right now when I do that?
Yeah.
But we never had cats in that area, but lots of coyotes over the years. And
Yeah.
yeah. And they would, a lot of people with little dogs. I remember one day we were there's like 30 people at lunchtime, and a bald eagle came and landed on the lamppost in the middle of the park. And if I had something like a Chihuahua or any small breed like that, I would have been picking it up right away, because this thing just looked like it was shopping.
Right.
It was just sitting there,
Yeah.
scanning the ground, well, that little red one looks kind of tasty, kind of thing. And like, hey, pick up your freaking dogs. And then, nobody'd seen it because everybody was busy talking. And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
we tend to get, if the river stays open any winters that are mild enough, the eagles will stick around because they can fish.
Right.
But once the river freezes over, they pretty much leave for a while because food is more limited.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes when the way the weather goes, the river will be frozen over, and my wife had taken me down to by the bird sanctuary there at the edge of town, just to watch birds that were coming in to pick up. There's ducks that'll come from the zoo, and they're out in that area. So you get a duck sitting by a rock in the river, and it's all ice.
Right.
And an eagle will come swooping in and do a half landing and just start doing 360s, you know,
Right.
and or just grab the duck and go. But we kind of go sitting duck,
Right.
you know, like
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun. But anyway, we're getting way off topic.
Yeah.
So the woman about ADHD, ADD.
Yeah. So that was a question that came in online here.
Yeah, I've done quite a few talks at teachers' conventions about that because a lot of them are concerned or annoyed or whatever, and
Yeah.
we've got parents that sometimes don't want their children drugged, and in other cases they do, like just fix my kid kind of thing. I'm in no doubt that if Ritalin was around when I was a kid, I would have been on the maximum dose.
Right.
Because I used to always get these report cards that would say, well, as usual, Blaine's marks, like I was always a straight A kid, but as usual, Blaine's marks are very good, but he tends to be very distracting to the rest of the class, so could you tune him in a little bit? So what happens when a brighter than the pack kid gets bored?
Right.
We start braiding the girl in front of us hair,
Yeah.
or making airplanes, or spitballs, or whatever.
Yeah.
And because we're bored out of our minds, because we're 2 steps ahead of the teacher is, you know, and
Yeah.
so
And the other side of that too is like it's such an unnatural environment for children to be in, right? Like be in your desk,
Sitting in a
sit
desk,
down, you
yeah.
know, like under fluorescent lights, and
Yeah.
you know, pay attention to the stuff you really don't care about, and
yep.
so there's definitely a lot at play. It could be, yeah, I'm just way above this and I really don't care, and it could be,
And
yeah,
they zone out.
yeah,
But if they're misbehaving, it's usually because they're just trying to stay awake.
right,
And I have a strong feeling that had I been on Ritalin, it might have flattened a lot of the creativity I enjoyed in my life. Like I've been a writer and a photographer and a painter and many things, and it might have tuned me out of all that, you know, all that creative stuff. But it was funny, one day I ran into, and I've shared this story at teachers' conventions, and it was well received. At first I thought they'd throw rocks at me, but one of the things we might do is tap a pencil
right,
at a desk, and some teachers would come up and whack you in the hand with a yardstick or something, or just their hand, right?
yeah,
And that happened a lot to me growing up. I was like tick, 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 with a pencil. And
it was the drummer in you, hey?
yeah, and a couple of years after being out of high school, the band I was with was playing a one-nighter back at my high school. And for some reason, I didn't put my sticks down when we took a break, and I jumped off the stage, and I had my sticks in my hand. I was right at the edge of the stage, and Mrs. Henderson came running up to me and said, "Blaine, wow, is your band? Wow, what a great band, and you're such a good drummer." And I started tick, 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 with my drum, with my stick on the edge of the stage, and I said, "Yes, Mrs. Henderson." I threw my sticks in the air, and I said, "It's all because of your boring social studies class." and her jaw just about hit her knees, you know. But of course, the teachers all laughed. I was happy because I didn't offend them.
Yeah.
But you know, sometimes you realize you're guilty and you can still laugh at yourself. You know?
Yeah,
but
it's the same way. Always like,
I would, you know, it's interesting. I think on a previous occasion, we were talking about a lot of common things like caffeine and alcohol,
Right.
that the dosage flips. And so Ritalin is actually a stimulant in a strong enough dose, but at lower doses, it was a depressive. So the kids would be put, if you were hyperactive, you'd be put on a low dose to deflate you a little bit. And adults could use it the other way around, just to be perkier at the office or whatever, rather like having a cup of coffee, right? So things that I worked with quite a few children when I was still practicing with ADD or ADHD, and one of the things that occurred to me was how many of these kids in today's world are mineral deficient.
Right.
And so we're talking with Mom was always present, and what's your typical diet like and whatever, and if it was all processed food or whatever. So just to qualify, vitamins, because a lot of people talk about vitamins and minerals in the same breath, vitamins are very fragile, fickle things. Like if you have carrots in your fridge that were picked 2 months ago and sat in a cooler in a distributor and then finally ended up in a store, and now you've had them in the fridge for a month.
Yeah.
There's not many vitamins left in those carrots.
Right.
But minerals are like rocks.
Mm-hmm.
They're like little rocks. So you could literally take that carrot and incinerate it into white ash, and the minerals are all still there. So if you've got somebody that's floating a lot, let's put some rocks in their pockets. Mm-hmm. So let's make sure that that kid's getting perhaps a mineral supplement.
Right.
And that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Right.
And unfortunately, so much of our food, because of the soils, doesn't have the minerals that it used to.
Because we use simple
NPK,
fertilizers,
Right. Oh, NPK makes it grow,
Yep.
nice
Yep.
and big, but it's empty. It's hollow in that regard.
And I think about that, like a lot of the pea family, for example, was brought over from Europe to improve pasture land. So we got stuff like alfalfa.
Yeah.
And if you look at an aerial photograph, for a short period of time, I was the only darkroom worker for the federal government at one of the two satellites. One of them was right out of my hometown. The other one's in Newfoundland somewhere, that track all the weather satellites.
Oh,
and this is going years ago. Mm-hmm. So you could see these circles on the fields, and those were irrigation circles where
Right.
the plants were growing healthier. But plants like alfalfa, depending on where the water table is, will root us down as close to 30 feet. Like they've dug it up carefully, got 27-foot deep alfalfa roots,
Wow.
which are bringing minerals from deep in the soil, where there's, just flip that number around, 72 trace minerals to bring it up to the surface. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was really, really, really nutritive. But if you irrigate the crap out of things, I've never talked to an agronomist about this, but when you irrigate the land, and between here and Medicine Hat, there's a lot of irrigating going on, so you get this big, fluffy, rich alfalfa.
Yeah.
But how many minerals are in it?
Right.
Because
it
it's
have
only
to go
rooting
down.
this deep in the soil because you're irrigating it. So I think we make a lot of mistakes that way, agriculturally. But anyway, I think a lot of kids in that arena are just mineral deficient. So if we put some rocks in their pockets, and then quite literally, quite often it's usually boys, not girls. And in defense of the drug, there was a young lady from Lethbridge, I think, that was in to see me a couple of times with her mother. And in their own words, Ritalin saved her life.
Right.
She was such a mess, and that was a good use of that drug. But there's a lot of other people that I think didn't need that drug, and had it mistakenly or whatever, and there was other things to choose from. So the lady who called in had mentioned she's been putting some lavender on the pads of his feet, which isn't a bad idea. Because we absorb so many things. I talked about onion and garlic, I think, the other day.
Yeah.
But I would think it would be better just doing like I do with an air striker, have a bottle and just open it and sniff it directly from the bottle once in a while, or several times a day.
Yeah.
If he's actually hyperactive, because she wasn't. I'm not think she was clear about. She just said ADD, ADHD. That's it. But she didn't give us an age, and sometimes I've just had a frank talk with a young man, a boy, and said, listen, you have to realize this is part of who you are. Mm-hmm. There may be outside reasons like mineral deficiency, so we're going to put some rocks in your socks, or in your pockets, and but you have to realize, like, I was ADD and probably still am, so I've learned to accept it and deal with that. So you have to understand that teacher that seems to be mean to you or you're not getting along with is going to be replaced by a boss, or even some of your friends, or a spouse one day,
Right.
but especially a boss is kind of like a teacher. So you have to learn how to control this, because it's with you for life.
Yeah.
If the mineral deficiency fixes things, great, but it's going to be part of your personality profile.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to take some steps here. And one of the things that I found worked so well, especially if you got to pick your own one out in a park somewhere, is one of the larger pine cones.
Right.
Or you can just steal one from a Christmas decoration or whatever, but you get the like silver bark and white bark pines we were talking about. If you're ever down in that area, you can go pick one yourself or get one in a store. You get those cones that are about this big. Now, this isn't a game. You're not going to throw it at somebody across the classroom. You're just going to have it in your desk, and whenever you're feeling a little wingy, just take the pine cone out, keep it in your lap. It's not a game. It's not for anybody else to care about, and you're just going to sit there and fidget with all of those little scales, they're called.
Right.
Roll it around once in a while. It's just going to give you something to do with your fingers. And that's worked a lot.
No way.
Yeah, I've helped a lot of kids with pine cones.
Right.
But if it's about the hyperactivity, my first choice would be vetiver, which is from a grass root. And we think about grass roots and getting grounded, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a pretty smelling oil. It smells a bit like grandma's root cellar, because it's so rooty.
Yeah, it's a little more like manly in that sense, like musky kind of thing. Yeah.
And so just, you could take a drop, and it's a bit thick. So like if you've got a recipe where you need 10 drops of that and 6 drops of that and 8 drops of that and 10 drops of that, you could actually walk the dog while counting 10 drops of vetiver, and this is another way with recipes, things change a lot. If you get a recipe in drops and you start making bigger batches, you have to change things a lot, because like I would be always making things with beakers and that sort of thing, graduate cylinders, where you're measuring actual liquid levels, because some drops, like lemon, counting 20 drops of lemon is really tough because it's so thin that when you turn it over, it's bang, 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 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Where vetiver, Carol, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you again for the party the other night. Just a second. 1. And I really appreciated that no cheese cheesecake. Would you mind sharing that recipe with me? Hang on a second. 2. Like you could almost mow the lawn while counting 10 drops of vetiver.
Yeah.
So you could just open it and smell the bottle, or actually get 1 drop and do this thing again, like I was talking about lung infections.
Yeah.
And take a minute to just breathe it deep, and that really grounds you out. Did I mention the horses the other day? It's one that I've gotten a lot of thoroughbred show horses people to do, and all of them have called me back with success stories to just, as you're grooming the horse before going out into the ring, and just 2 drops on the hands, and then you're just petting the horse. Very grounding. And then if the smell is too much, I would turn to perhaps clary sage, which typically has even the chemical that makes lavender sedating is linaloyl acetate. An ester, the esters all end with ate, A-T-E at the end. So when you see something talking about the chemical components, linaloyl acetate is where linalool, the alcohol that I mentioned earlier, holds hands with acetic acid, which is in plant juice always. So that's what vinegar is, acetic acid.
Yeah.
So when an acid holds hands with an alcohol, it forms an ester, and esters are all calming and grounding.
Right.
So Roman chamomile is considered the king of that class because it's a total of mixed esters. About 85% of the oil is esters, different ones. Lavender will range 35 to 45, and so will clary sage. So back to you and the Woodies joke. Lavender might be too girly for a young man, but or sometimes grandma used to do rude things with it. It was just too much of it around.
Yeah.
So clary sage is almost like wet hay or whatever. It's kind of an earthy smell, and that's another one that you can use to put on the pillow or sleep on a tissue, whatever, at night if you're having trouble getting to sleep. Never do that if you've been drinking other than a glass of wine 3 hours ago at supper. But if you've been drinking, you don't want to use clary sage at bedtime because you're going to have pretty creepy nightmares.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, people that'll rip your throat out and eat it raw and run away laughing. Zombies galore.
Yeah.
So clary sage is another good one. Could be even stronger than lavender as a sedative. That's more of a woody smell. And bergamot is another one that's almost as high as lavender, which is citrus. Right. If you want something pretty again. That's another one that can be used at bedtime if you don't like lavender. And it smells a little more like the Christmas mandarins and things we get, but it more than just an orange. It's a little more calming because of the esters, where most citrus oils are really bright because they're full of those little monoterpenes that just, somebody way over there is peeling an orange.
Right.
I'm going to smell it where I'm sitting in 5 seconds. You know, if there's a window, some sort of backlighting, somebody peeling an orange, and you look up, you can see when you pull the rind off, the stuff is spurting out, and the little tiny molecules are just floating on the air, which is why citrus is so good to use in a diffuser,
right?
Because you freshen the whole room.
Yeah, they're just so bright and uplifting.
Years ago, a table like the one over there, my mother would have, in her early life, would have had to protect the finish of that tabletop with kind of like in Karate Kid, the movie, wax on, wax off. You'd take paste wax and rub it on all over and then you had to just keep rubbing till you got a real thin finish. Where Johnson's & Johnson's came out with Lemon Pledge. Right. I pledge to make housework less work for you. So they just dissolved paste wax in lemon oil because it's a solvent, and then you could just go psh, 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 and wait a few minutes and wipe it off with a paper towel. You know, and the look at that shine. I always think of George Carlin when this comes up, and I'll be doing this on Sunday, just to make a point about can oils be used orally. Everything in a candy store has essential oils in it.
Yeah.
Everything. So this notion that you can't use them internally is just silly.
Yeah,
but
really
you have to know the right dosage and everything else, right?
Yeah.
So I'll be talking about that. I like to take, it's lime, lots of orange, and then a bit of lime, and just 1 drop of cardamom, and it is totally a row of tropical fruit lifesavers, or wine gums.
Right.
There it is, without all the sugar and whatever. And what are they? They're happy.
Yeah.
So back to the pledge, you just saved a lot of time, wax on, wax off, and you've got all of this lemon floating around, actually sanitizing your kitchen or your dining room or whatever.
Yeah.
And the whole house smells upbeat, fresh, and happy.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I buy that product, right? You know?
For sure.
So back to solvents being used, like I said, turpentine and limonene is used in a lot of cleaning products.
Right.
One of my favorites, I buy it at Home Depot, but there's a cleaning line. There's about 5 colors, I think, and I've only used the orange one. I learned this from one of my massage therapy students. If you can only, I learn a lot from my students all the time, and somebody had told me they really liked pistachio oil, and I should start carrying it because it laundered better. And so a woman from Jasper was on the phone complaining about stained sheets. And I said, oh, try the pistachio oil, because somebody in Airdrie told me about this. And the next time I heard from the person in whatever I just said, she was saying, well, that's just stupid. The stains are even worse than almond oil. And the other woman, when I saw her again, said, oh, that's because she's using cheap sheets. Like the polyester sheets hold oils more, right? Than cotton does. So she's the one that turned me onto this product called ZEP, which is Z-E-P.
Right, I've seen this, yeah.
There's about 4 colors. And I'm going to buy a 4-liter jug of that stuff, because I can buy that cheaper, even buying orange oil, buy 5-gallon pails of it for my business. It's cheaper for me to buy ZEP.
Right.
And if I get a little, this is probably cotton, if I get a little stain that I notice on my shirt, I'm going to put 1 drop of lemon oil on that, throw it in the wash. But if I slipped with a 5-gallon pail of almond oil and I covered half this shirt,
Right.
I'm just going to put a good shot of Zep in the laundry, and it comes out perfectly clean.
Right.
So
Because that's citrus oil based, hey? The Zap.
totally orange, yeah.
Yeah.
And with all the current intelligent and nonsensical use of essential oils, like it makes me crazy if I hear somebody talking about raspberry seed oil or sunflower oil in the same breath with lavender oil, and they think they're from the same equation. Like, no, the first two were essential fatty acids,
Right.
which are totally different breed of oils. Those are something they're called essential. Good use of the word essential, because you need them in your diet. They're either in your diet or they aren't.
Yeah.
And there's some that we need for just nice skin and various things that are like hormone. We use things like evening primrose oil and whatnot for dealing with PMS and menopause. So the fats are essential to your diet.
Yeah.
That's why they're called
Yeah.
essential.
Your body doesn't
Essential.
produce them. You got to get them through your diet.
They have to be coming in your diet. You can't make them yourself. So that's essential that you have them in your diet. Where essential oils, there's nothing oily about lavender oil. If you put a couple drops on a clean piece of computer paper and put it by a sunny window and look at it later in the day, there's nothing on that paper, nothing to smell, nothing to see.
Right.
It's gone, it volatilized off. So when the early people were making distillations, they felt they were capturing the essence or spirit of the plant.
Right.
So they called them, it was more like essence, spirit.
Right.
They call them essential oils because both essential oils and essential fatty acids both are hydrophobic, which means they're afraid of water. So throw a chicken in a pot of water and bring it to simmer for a while, and you got fat on top.
Yeah.
Because it's hydrophobic. It's afraid, let me out of the fat, let me out of the water, I can't swim. So they all come to the top. So essential oils do that as well. Mm-hmm. So the only thing they have in common, really, is that they float on water.
Right.
So they're both called oils. And aroma what?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's going to be great. So June 25th, come join us live in person at Light Cellar. And if you're far away, we'll record it. We'll stream it.
Oh yeah, okay. So you can get it this way.
Yeah. But best come in person. Yeah, and we've got a time that Blaine will be presenting, and then a time after that where just kind of hanging out and ask questions, give hugs, that kind of thing.
I'll mingle as long as there's somebody there to mingle with.
Right? Yeah. Cool. Well, just to kind of wrap up that conversation around the ADHD, the autism, being on that spectrum, I think we covered some great ground. I think first and foremost, one can always look at gut health, because you mentioned about vitamins, minerals, but if someone's gut is not operating properly or leaky gut, I mean, that is really the foundation. And there's a fantastic book called GAPS, The Gut and Psychology Syndrome. It's Natasha Campbell McBride, and she's got story after story, testimony after testimony, like things like schizophrenia, autism, ADHD, all that, a whole range of issues people have dealt with where we think, oh, well, that's obviously mental, right? It's the mind, but it's got its root in the gut, so she's got a whole protocol. So that is your foundation, and then you always, of course, want to add in the minerals. It's not so abundant in our food these days. You've got to be really careful and selective. And then the flip side of that is eliminating those things that, can cause agitation, chemicals, right? Artificial
The missing
flavors,
link,
colors.
in our culture, the missing link I don't care if it's standard practice or alternative medicine, is people not spending enough time with a client. I had to learn to say client-patient because saying patient wasn't
Right.
appropriate. We get away with it now, more or less. But is not spending enough time with them. So I had a gal came to see me because she was hearing voices. And I talked to her for quite a while because I said, well, and I wanted her to describe what was happening because I said, this might be a gift. This is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's called guidance.
Right.
And exactly, do you think I would hear the voices if I was sitting close to you? No, they're just internal. I said, well, okay. Anyway, I was coaching her to stick it out with her physician or psychologist that was trying to get her on drugs, and she did. And she took the meds, and I ran into her a couple of years later on the street because she was quite a mess when I met her.
Yeah.
And because she would just, there were too many voices, and she took her meds, and they worked beautifully. Mm-hmm. And I met her on the street, and she had gotten married and had a baby, and she was completely balanced.
Right.
And I could have stuck it out as a herbalist and sold her something, but I heard her.
Yeah.
And said, no, this is not my place. Go see him again.
Yeah.
So we too often, in both fields, standard and alternative, we have to remember that if there's something that, is this a condition or is this a symptom of a condition?
Right.
Because if we jump to conclusions that this is the condition and we're going to treat it, then we're treating the symptom. Like, you get my drift there?
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes a condition is actually just a symptom that we have to look deeper, because what could be a skin problem is actually a lung problem.
Right.
Or whatever, and ask more questions and that sort of thing. And I really want to stress that both parties can be guilty of that.
For sure. Yeah.
Not listening enough and looking through it. So quite often I've had people referred to me, and talking to them on the phone, I haven't even taken an appointment. They were referred to me, but I'm referring them to somebody else.
Right.
And I think I might have mentioned already when we were talking about something else, the allergies, Linda Codnar and I became good friends because she was somebody who was a pharmacist first, but then just one day sort of went, I don't think I can do this anymore. I wanted to help people. Mm-hmm. And became a natural healer, but I would always refer her to, if somebody was on 23 meds for hypothyroidism or something like that, I'm just going, that's way over my head. I'm going to send her to Linda because she understands all the drugs, and some of them can be weaned off and some of them not. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things, even our herbs, that you shouldn't just quit overnight. Yeah. That things should be weaned, or there was actually something better all along that you could have, should have, would have been taking, and so that's really important too. Yeah. To find somebody that you're comfortable with and think actually heard you. And back to the children, I succeeded with lots, if not all, that were brought to me. And
yeah, I loved your perspective about context of schooling. Okay, this is what it is. How do you manage it? And also seeing it as a gift, so that when you are in the right context, out of that kind of box that we're put into during school work, that you can really let that gift that wants to come through. This is part
of your personality. How do we control it?
Yeah. Cool. Well, some of the things that came up in our conversation, I don't know where this would go, but I think it's worth sharing this idea of back to the forest and logging and that type of thing. Like, obviously, there's a time and a place for it, and I can see such huge potential if we just shift things around. Like I've got a wild forager out in Ontario, and he supplies primarily, most of our chaga comes from him, a few other medicinal mushrooms, and a big part of what he does is he goes into areas that are about to be logged. And there's a lot of controversy around chaga. Are you some people just kind of almost like strip mine it from the forest. And that can happen with almost anything wild forage, but he's going into areas where it's about to be logged, like clear cut. So, it's not ideal, but it's a bunch of medicine that is about to be lost anyways.
Perfect, yeah.
Or like you said, when even selective logging, they're cutting, they got all these branches with all the leaves, all the needles, utilizing that as medicine. There's a huge potential.
If you don't mind Calgary's got generally good quality air. I mean, right now people are whining about the smoke from the forest fires, but I've met people that make balm of Gilead,
right?
But they only go out they live beside a golf course and there's a lot of trees there, and they only go out after windstorms,
right?
And pick the buds off all the branches that got blown on the ground.
Yeah, or befriend an arborist, right? Those guys are.
So you can follow. They don't care. They throw them in a pile for a while as they're working.
Yeah.
Because they're just going to throw them into the shredder.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's gone forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's better than, like, recycling is a beautiful thing, but finding ways of repurposing, reusing.
I don't think
better yet.
I don't think this would fly, but I always thought, like, if I were an arborist and or maybe I could pair with an arborist, as an herbalist, like offer a service. And I did this to my own trees. We had 2 beautiful birch. They're about 40 years old. Like, they might have had a few more years in them, but in the Calgary environment, they just don't really live that long.
Right.
So anyways, they died, and one of them was completely dead. The other was in the process of dying. We took them down, and then also in transforming our yard, we ripped up all the grass. There was nice young spruce. There was juniper. I felt bad about removing them, but just the way that was. And so I actually made medicine from them. But I thought, like,
well,
I don't know.
I hope you kept the birch for firewood.
Oh, totally.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. So did that, but I thought about it. I was like, I don't know, would there be a demand, like any kind of herbalist out there could pair with an arborist, or maybe they're an arborist and they've got interest as a herbalist. It's almost like a service, It's like, hey, we're going to take your birch out, we're going to take your spruce out.
Absolutely.
But as a memento, we're going to, here's some medicine made from it. Like, would you like tincture? Would you like tea? Would you like a hydrosol? And I don't know. Do people care that much? I think most people don't, but...
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times when somebody might have seen me on TV or whatever talking about comfrey, for example, and they had just a bunch of it in their backyard, and it would have just, well, if they were lucky, even composted.
Right.
But they said, hey, do you want to come and pick all the comfrey? And I said, sure. So I would take with me some of the products, the finished products, like back to superplanetary wound gel or just comfrey extract in liquid form, and say, this is where it's going to go, and I'd leave them some finished product as a thank you. Absolutely, same bent.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Right? So any aspiring entrepreneurial herbalists, there could be some potential there, right? Yeah, people get their own customized medicine out of whatever is getting removed from their yard. Hopefully there's some potential there.
There was a place that used to be the edge of town where I would go on the north side, where I would go gather some Artemisia frigida, that's wormwood sage, for smudging. And there might be a cow standing 5 feet away from me, kind of thing. And I went there for years, and then the next time I went there, there was a neighborhood.
Oh.
So there's even, how we you never know what's just out in some wild, just an acre of wild grasses and things. What else is growing there? Things like the Monarda fistulosa that you brought up last show. Can I call this a show? Is that
totally.
okay?
Yeah.
I had made that joke with one of the gals that called in with the question about feeling like I'm on the Red-Green show. And then when she got back to me about something else, she said, you just need to get some red suspenders.
For sure.
So, was there one other thing I wanted other than clary sage? Oh yeah, with bergamot.
Okay.
A lot of people have indigestion because they're just so stressed when they're eating. Like, when you're chewing food, I myself am guilty for eating too fast, because your body produces hundreds of enzymes, And if you carried them all around, you'd need a body as big as a delivery van. So your tongue is actually talking to every organ, including the intestine itself, about what it's excreting before you even swallow.
Right.
Essentially, there's nothing past here that can identify what you're swallowing.
Right.
Technically, even juice should be chewed to let your body know what's on the way. And then your liver and your pancreas and everybody gets involved and produces things. So all you need to turn that whole system off is to be arguing or even watching the news at mealtime.
Right.
You know, how was school today, John? Oh, that bully, it was after, like we do it with kids, or you're arguing with your spouse or whatever, it's tax time, you're stressed about things. So it's really important to being, whether you're religious or not, the practice of saying grace is beautiful, but you can't say grace and then go back to arguing about the next election, right? Then you wasted your time saying grace, as far as I'm concerned. So if you can just stop at mealtime and give thanks, that's beautiful. But it could be lunch at the office and everything's busy and on the run. The essential oil, that bergamot, back to bergamot, part of it is the linalool acetate, same as lavender, that's in there again. But it's such a nice, like it's actually happening to me right now, even talking about it. I'm not kidding. My whole mouth is getting full of saliva, just even talking about it, because I've done it so many times. Take a drop or two of bergamot, and just before mealtime, and your mouth will just start salivating. Yeah, I got this going on. I've done it for so many years. That's hilarious. So for people with indigestion that are on the run a lot, bergamot is your best friend at mealtime.
Right.
Just sniff it for a bit or put it some on a tissue or whatever. If you think it's weird to be doing this in a restaurant, just put a couple drops on the napkin and sniff it or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much.
Well, it gives a whole new meaning to saying grace, right? Too.
Yes. There you are in prayer position.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Fun.
I dragged that on a little bit. But, okay, now we're done.
All right. Good chatting. And June 25th.
Yeah. Well, I'll probably be back before then, no?
Yeah, exactly.
Next week, right.
We got one more show before then.
So, keep those questions coming in. And I had, with one of the ladies that had called you, emailed you, I was able to respond to her in more depth because her email showed up when you forwarded it or something.
Right.
And then the last one I couldn't.
Oh, okay.
Because quite often, I don't mind putting a little more detail if I have it on a topic. So don't be afraid to email me. Sometimes it takes me a while to get back to people, but I do the best I can to share good news and appropriate information. And it might be, no, there's nothing. I don't mind, admitting I can't help you at all with that problem. I'm just that kind of guy. But don't be afraid to do that. I'm not going to sell your email to anybody else or whatever. But if it was something here, you can get through Malcolm, and he's going to have lots to add too, or we'll try and cover it on the show. But you can email me as well. Just Blaine the Herbman.
There we are.
BlaineTheHerbman@gmail.com.
Okay, right on. Well, thanks again.
All right.
Okay, have a good one.
Thank you as well.